Hey, welcome back to part 2 of this video series. So in this one we're going to be looking at the tools that we're going to be using. Now obviously we're going to be using Bubble as our primary tool on this project. However, as many of you may know or may not know, Bubble is great for building web applications. So in other words, applications that work great on the desktop, that work great on tablet for example. However, it's not great at developing native mobile applications for iOS and Android. Okay, it just isn't that great for it. It's not designed for it. It doesn't spit out native applications. There are ways around it that you can sort of package it up and put wrappers around them, but they're not true mobile applications. The other thing as well is when you're developing a mobile application is that it's not always the best thing to do is to actually have just the one application and make it responsive and that's your app. The mobile version of your app may not need to be that full in-depth system that you've got on your desktop. It may just need to have a certain number of features and also some features that maybe you wouldn't want to have on your desktop. For example, let's say barcode reading. You may not necessarily need to have that in your desktop app, but you would want it to have it on your mobile app, for example. Okay, so I prefer to use a different mobile app than I would. So I prefer to use a different mobile app builder than the desktop web app builder. And the one that I really like, which for me is kind of the unsung hero of the no-code world, is AppGyver. When you get into AppGyver, it really is a great system. So if we have a look at their website, so it's been acquired by SAP. Now that happened about 18 months ago at the beginning of 2021. I'm recording this in early November 2022. And yeah, it got acquired by SAP. Now SAP are not sort of on everyone's radar, but they are like one of the top 5 biggest software companies in the world. They used to be in the top 3, so they may well still be, but certainly they must be in the top 5. They're big. They tend to sell software to big enterprises. Okay, that's why sort of if you're not in that space, you might not have heard of them. And they've sort of acquired AppGyver as part of their no-code strategy. Okay, but the AppGyver app is completely free to use, and SAP have kept it that way. So basically, you've got like the community side of things, which is the independent developers, and then obviously then they're attaching it as part of their own enterprise level solutions. Okay, quick interruption because a quick update with this is I recorded that about sort of the 8th, 9th of November, and within a week of that, on the 15th of November, SAP decided to rename AppGyver. They now call it SAP Build Apps. So they've got kind of a new range of products for the no and low code space called SAP Build, and AppGyver is the apps part of that. Okay, so you've got the community edition, which is kind of what we would be using, which is still free, completely free to use, and they do have a different tier, the Build Apps free tier, which enables you to gain some access to server resources, which is not something that we'll be using. But if we look at their website, the new website for AppGyver, which is now not called AppGyver, if you look here, they're still saying AppGyver is now part of SAP. They're now calling it the SAP Build Apps Community Edition, and it's a similar sort of thing. They're just telling you there that the Community Edition is build web and mobile apps, integrate REST APIs, and all of this type of thing is more to do with collaboration and integration with their other services, as well as a new server-side thing that they're doing. I'm not sure if it's a database. I think it's something like Cloud Functions, where you can build your own no-code back-end, if you like. So it's a similar sort of website. It's just changed a little bit, some of the details of it. So yeah, I don't know whether this is a good thing or a bad thing. I mean, it's still the same thing, effectively. It was always going to happen. As long as they enable a community edition free, I think it's probably a good thing. Yesterday, I'm filming this on the 16th of November, yesterday on the 15th of November at the Tech Head, so this is sort of the guy announcing it here.
SAP Build Apps, which is the next version of SAP AppGyver with powerful new functionality.
Yeah, so that's pretty much it. So just need to interrupt you with that, and yeah, let's crack on. And AppGyver for me is something where it's only happened twice in the no-code space where kind of something has sent shivers down my spine, and the first one was obviously Bubble. But AppGyver, once I got into it and I realised what was going on here, that it really is something really good. And one of the things that I really like about AppGyver is this is like a page, so this is like a login page that I've just done, but you've got like a login button. Similar to Bubble's workflows, you have these what they call logic flows, and so you can add the logic to the button, and it looks like this. This is like the workflow steps, and you can see that you draw lines between them, and you've got like conditionals. So like this is actually like a function that I've developed behind the scenes. So a lot of people just think it's very surface level. You can actually go fairly deep in AppGyver, and so you can make a choice. So okay, is it empty? If it's yes, then it will go to that. If it's no, it will go to that. And that kind of decision making type of flows I really like. In terms of the layouts, you've also got like the element tree that you've got in Bubble. You've got all of the different elements you can drop on the page. You've also got a marketplace. You can install different ones in there. I won't go through it now, but for me, I call it the unsung hero of the no-code world, and I really like it. And it's great for developing mobile apps because it spits out your iOS app and it spits out your Android app as well. And if we have a look down here, they also say that you can develop, proper web apps and everything. To be fair, I prefer Bubble to develop my web apps. It's tools for the job for me, and that's why I'm going to use AppGyver for this one as well. And it's used by some pretty big companies. I mean, SAP are a huge company, so they've invested in it, and it's quite a mature product. It's been around for quite a long time now, and yeah, I just like it. And there are many areas that I actually prefer AppGyver over Bubble, actually, in many different areas. But it doesn't have the scope of Bubble. It doesn't try and do everything that Bubble does. It purely is for developing front-end mobile applications. So it doesn't have a back end in there at all. You have to make it talk to an API to get your data back. And so here I've just got a couple of things in here, what they call data resources, where I can sort of call into a REST API. In this case, both of these are calling to a Bubble API. So for logging in and things like this, I can call a login API and so on and so forth. Now the AppGyver part of the series and the app isn't going to come quite yet, but I'm just letting you know the tools that I'll be building with this. One of the other things that I like is that you can actually, as you're developing your app, you can actually download a viewer app onto your phone and then view your application live in there as well. And you can also do it live on the actual website as well by just clicking launch, and then you've got like a preview. You can open the preview portal there. Bubble is for web apps. AppGyver is for mobile apps. The web app is predominantly for the desktop and maybe tablet. We will make it responsive. Obviously, if they do open it on a mobile, you want it to look good, but it's not that crucial because really they should be looking at getting the mobile app, which is for iOS and Android platforms as well. And you can make the AppGyver mobile apps work better on tablets than perhaps if they were using the actual web app. So one thing that I want to address here is that the new hotness in the market at the minute is a no-code mobile platform called Flutterflow. Okay, everybody's talking about it. Lots of people are raving about it. And so you might say, well, why are you using AppGyver versus Flutterflow? Surely Flutterflow is going to win. Blah blah blah. And maybe that might be the case. AppGyver, to be fair, since it got acquired by SAP, has continued to innovate, but it perhaps has lost that little bit of kind of indie sort of following, if you like. But that doesn't mean to say that it's still a bad choice. But Flutterflow, amongst indie developers looking to get into developing mobile apps in the no-code space, are really looking at Flutterflow. And I've had a look at Flutterflow and I've played with it, and I don't want to be one of these who's guilty of just having a surface look at it and then dismissing it. I've not dismissed it by any means. It's just a certain elements of it that I just don't like. For example, I just explained with AppGyver, you can preview the app very quick, whereas Flutterflow have got like 2 to 4 minute preview time. There are different ways around it, but it's not great. The idea that you can spit the code out as well is something. I mean, I've got my opinion on that I won't go into here about tools that claim to spit the code out as though that's a massive advantage. As a coder, you'd think that I would say yes, that's a great advantage. I actually don't think it is, and I've got my reasons for that I won't go into here. But the code, it's important to note, the code that this thing spits out, because it's built on top of the Google's Flutter platform, it's not JavaScript or any sort of really mainstream language like TypeScript or one of the others. It's actually a language called Dart, which is a fairly obscure language that Google developed a long time ago. I think they've struggled to find a place for it, really. There are many who could disagree with that, but it's kind of the Flutter platform, which is what Flutterflow is built on, is based upon the Dart language, and they've kind of managed to find a home for it in as part of Flutter, which is why it's getting a little bit of popularity than perhaps it was before. But that's the code that's going to get spit out, okay? It's Dart code. I've had a play with it. It looks like a great tool, and it's obviously getting better and better. I just, like I say, I like to feel the spine tingliness of the tools that I'm using. I feel that for Bubble. I feel that for AppGyver. I don't feel it for Flutterflow. I'll probably be proven to be completely wrong on that, by the way, but I'm entitled to it. So in terms of building mobile apps, I'm going to be going with AppGyver on that one. When I get to the AppGyver part of it, please follow along, and I'm sure that you'll see why I am so keen on that particular tool. Okay, so for the front end, we're going to have Bubble as a web app, AppGyver for the mobile apps. What about the back end? So you can split the back end into two sort of separate parts. You've got the API and you've got the database. So the database obviously is where you're going to store your actual data of your app, and it's going to be sat on a server in the cloud somewhere. Thankfully, with no-code tools, you don't have to worry about that. That's all taken care of for you. But also you've got an API. Now, an API is generally how the front end talks to the back end. So in other words, when you make a request, when you need to get some data or some tasks to carry out, you'll generally talk to the API. That will do what it needs to do to talk to the database and then get the data back into the front end. I maybe should clarify for beginners what the front end is. The front end is what the user sees. It's what the user sees, and it's what the user interacts with. It's what the app is effectively to the user. The back end is just for us to take care of and make the right technical choices effectively. So let's have a look at the options. So the database, the natural choice is to go with Bubble as its database because it's built into the platform, it's baked in, it's so convenient, it's so simple. So that would be the obvious choice. And also we don't really need to deal with an API when we're dealing with a Bubble front end for the web app and a Bubble database. We do not need an API. There naturally is an API going on in the background, but Bubble deals with that for us. So we're just making native calls from our front end app into our database and back again in the most simplest, easiest way that you can possibly imagine. Bubble does have a back-end API that you can develop, so you can develop your own API. They've also got a built-in what they call the data API, which is just straightforward going and grabbing data from the database. Now with our Bubble app, we don't need to use that, but with our mobile app, because of AppGyver, we will need to use that particular integration. So in our, as I just demonstrated when I just showing you that little snippet of that AppGyver app, to be able to get the data from the Bubble database, we've got to go through a Bubble API that we develop, or maybe I just call the data APIs. The one I demonstrated was actually something that I've developed as a Bubble API, again, all in no code. So basically, AppGyver app will talk to make a call to an API that we've developed on Bubble. That goes and then talks to natively to Bubble's database, gets the data back again. A point on that one as well is Bubble's API is only accessible, can only be exposed to a mobile front end, whether it's AppGyver or anything else, if you're on a paid plan. So if you're still on the free plan, then you won't be able to sort of handle this side of it, which is AppGyver talking to Bubble's API and Bubble's database. Okay, so there are other options to that, but certainly if you want to do that, then you need either the Bubble trial of a paid plan or the actual paid plan, which is $25 a month at the minute if you want to pay up front for a year, or it's $29 if you want to pay on on a month-to-month basis. Right, so that's Bubble. That's using Bubble purely as the back end. What about if we wanted to look at something else? What are the other options that we've got available to us? Like I say, I'm a coder, and before I got into Bubble and I was coding some apps, I did start to use Supabase when it was really early stage. Now, like Bubble, it's sat on a Postgres database, which is a really popular open source database, and just like Bubble, it's hosted on AWS. So it's very, very similar. Now, obviously, Bubble's database has got like an abstraction layer over it. And when I said abstraction layer, I mean it's kind of putting like a sort of a friendly no-code front end on top of the database for you to interact with. And because of that, it does give you some limitations in terms of what you can get at. Now, generally speaking, when you're dealing with a database like Supabase or one of the others like MySQL, you are generally passing SQL commands, and that gives you a lot of power to what you can get at with the database. So much more power than you can with Bubble. So let's just have a quick look at the website for that. So this is the Supabase website. Building a weekend scale to millions. Supabase is an open source Firebase alternative. So Firebase, if you've used it, is Google's sort of serverless database that you can use, and it is really good. I've used it years. In fact, I used it before it even got acquired by Google, and it's a really great database. It's what they call a NoSQL database, so it's like a document database. So that means it allows you to store things and do some queries, but it's not as powerful as in terms of having control over the way that you can search the database, what we call querying the database. That's my opinion. Again, some people will differ on that one, but it's open source, which means it's built on open source tools. But it's like a serverless backend, so you don't need to worry about the implementation details. You just access it through an API. Okay, and like I say, it enables you to use SQL to query your database. It naturally will be more scalable than Bubble, purely because you can get down natively to the database to issue SQL commands. So you're dealing directly with the Postgres database that's underneath it, whereas Bubble is kind of hiding that from you. One of the other big advantages, by the way, and this is something that shouldn't be overlooked because it is an issue within the Bubble community with their database, which is that you need to host it on the Bubble's main cluster, which I believe is on the west coast of America, west coast of the US. If you want to host it in your own country, whether that's in Europe or I'm in the UK, for data sovereignty, or let's say you're worried about things like GDPR, then you can't really do that with Bubble unless you're going to pay them a lot of money to have a dedicated deployment. So, and this is where potentially Supabase can really win for you. So let's say I'm in here and I'm going to, not a new organization, I'm going to do a new project. Okay, and right away you get the choice of the region for your project. Now, you've got to do this on initial setup, so don't forget to do it if you need to set it. But you can see here, I can set it in West EU, which would be the nearest to me. You've got Ireland, you've got Central EU in Frankfurt, and all over the world. So if you're in Australia, you can set that, in Brazil. So you're in a situation where you can pick where your data is hosted, which I think is a massive potential benefit for Supabase. There are lots of other benefits to Supabase, but that's kind of one of the ones that I think that some people will look at. I think Bubble's got to look at this in the future to be able to keep people on its own back-end database. Okay. If you're going to deal with Supabase, then what's got to happen then is that both your web front end and your mobile front end has got to talk to Supabase's APIs, which will then talk to its database and get the data back. So one of the great things about Bubble's database is that it is very convenient. As we've shown before, your connection from the web front end to the database is completely native, 100% native. So convenient, so easy. With Supabase, you are having to go through an API to get there, but there are other benefits to it as well. One of the other things as well is just one thing I wanted to mention is, again, another big thing that's big on the no-code stage at the minute is Xano. And Xano is like a complete no-code backend, and it does have its own database, which again is sat on Postgres. And that's it doesn't give you the full power of SQL, but it is much more powerful than perhaps Bubble's database access. The only difference is that rather than AWS, it's sat on Google's cloud. However, at the minute I'm just looking at Xano as a potential API. So because Bubble does have some limitation in terms of the APIs, the back-end workflows, if you like, that you can develop, sometimes Xano is a good option to be able to build your no-code API, again just using like its version of workflows, to then talk to the Supabase API, and then when you need to, then your Bubble and your AppGyver can then talk to the Xano API, and the Xano API talks to Supabase to get the relevant data back. And that's just because you don't want to write code, you maybe don't want to write SQL, but you do need a little bit more access to functionality than perhaps Bubble's backend workflows will give you. Then Xano's backend workflows, their own API can maybe do the job for you. So Xano perhaps has a job to play there. So if we just have a look at that, that's at Xano.com, Xano with an X, yeah, and we can see that we've got automatic APIs that we can use. By the way, they've got a free tier, so it's free to get started. The same with Supabase as well, is that you can have two different projects, which is great to have like a dev version and a live version of your database until you can scale to the point where you'd need it. Okay. So why are we talking about Supabase here and Xano when I intend to build everything out on Bubble? Okay, apart from the mobile front end. The reason being is that with the app that I'm building, I'm actually going to edge my bets a little bit, and I'm going to basically develop it in such a way that I'm one version is talking to the Bubble database and another version is talking to the Supabase database. And the main reason being is that there is a little bit of a question mark over Bubble's database scalability. I actually believe that it is very scalable, certainly from my experience, but we just don't know. And I do like the power of SQL with Supabase, so I'm just edging my bets by developing it in that way. So basically I have one version that's talking to the Supabase API, another version that's just talking directly to the Bubble. But in terms of the app that we're building here in this tutorial, it's all going to be with Bubble. Okay, so we're going to be building the Bubble web app, Bubble API, the workflows, and the Bubble database. Okay, we're not going to touch the backend APIs just yet because we're only going to need those once we get into the mobile app with AppGyver, so we can touch those there. So that kind of is a look at the tools that I've considered and the tools that I've looked for. So rather than confuse things and start looking at this database for that and this for that, the only difference besides Bubble is going to be the AppGyver mobile app. Okay, so I hope that clarifies the tools that we're going to use. Stick with me in the next one where we're going to start looking at the database in Bubble. Okay, thanks for watching, take it easy, and I will see you in the next one.